Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Empowered to Live. I'm your host, Andrea Rose Butler. We're on the podcast where we grow stronger in our faith while boldly in purpose and get real about what it means to live empowered in today's world. And we are so excited that you are here today. And I have been working on, some possibilities of taglines, and I may do a poll out there to see what you think about a tagline for the podcast. And right now, the one I'm playing with is where faith and purpose align. I had it as collide, but collide seems more destructive versus coming into alignment or coming into agreement. And so I'm just putting that out there so you may see that going forward in some of the things that we do and just working. I tell you, this podcast has been a work in progress. And as I have been learning and growing and all those different things, so many things have been coming to pass. And, you know, there's change. And where there's change, there's growth. We are coming up. I got one more week. So the first week of June, I'm super excited that we will be celebrating 1 year. And, we're going to have something fun on that day. Just really excited about, where we are, the growth that has taken place, the transformation that has taken place. We are on more places and spaces. I'm working on Spotify, as I told you before, trying to get all of these ones, older ones downloaded from Facebook before they erase them all, reformat them, and then move them over to Spotify. And then from Spotify, hopefully we'll be also on iHeart Radio, and then also on Apple Music and on Google Podcasts is where. So we'll be all in different places. So we'll not only be on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google and Apple Podcasts. So we're going to be in all the places, trying to reach more people with the message of hope that you can find your purpose. There is purpose in everything. We're all created to do great things in the earth, and we need to know what those are. And then also the things that may hinder us from fulfilling our purpose in the earth. And so these where we are right now as we have grown and developed into where we are today. So we're dealing with more topical things. We've talked about finances, we've talked about purpose, and now we're dealing with some of those deep-rooted issues that sometimes also keep us from fulfilling the call and purpose that we have or that God has for our lives. And so in part 4 of our series on faith, freedom, and fulfillment, we're going to talk about discerning counterfeit relationships. And that, again, is one of those subjects, especially if you have found yourself in one of those relationships. I know for me, in my marriage was one that was definitely a counterfeit relationship, because we want to talk about some of the how to identify it and what to do once you've identified and then realize that you need to move away from that relationship so that you can be healed, and what it's going to take for us to do that. And I want to share that not all relationships that are good for us or appear good are actually good for us. And then there are others that may seem to be bad for us, but they're actually good for us. And as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about Peter and Judas. When Peter, when Christ says, I'm going to be crucified, this is going to happen. He was like, no, I'm going to fight to the death. You're not going to do that. You're not going to the cross. None of it's going to happen. And Jesus was like, get behind me, Satan. You're basically trying to hinder my purpose by telling me try to play it safe. And then here is Judas, who betrayed Jesus. He calls him friend because he was pushing him into purpose by his actions. And yes, his actions was not good. He betrayed him. He did all those different things. But that betrayal opened the door for Jesus to walk in purpose. So sometimes, we may see those relationships and we're like, oh, this is not, it's not good. It's not good. I can't believe this person. And yeah, the fact that they betrayal, there's a consequence for that, and we need to sometimes separate ourselves out from those relationships. But also, how do we move beyond all of those? And so, when I was thinking about this too, that saying that says that everything that glitters isn't golden. And I added this, and many have found fool's gold. And a fool gold looks like the real thing, and it can present as the real thing, but when it comes to standing the test of whether or not it's true or not, this is when it falls apart. And this is where relationships come in, when they're not true, when they're not genuine, where they're not the real thing. They fall apart during the testing period. And we have to recognize that we sometimes we walk into these relationships, whether, and I'm not just talking about romantic relationships, it's about all kinds of relationships, whether they're friendships, even sometimes family relationships, um, work relationships, where we go to work and we think these are my work friends, and so we invest ourselves, our times, our effort into these relationships, and then we realize that what we invested in was fool's gold. Many back in the gold rush, there were many people who were swindled out of their money and different things like that, by those who would come and said, hey, pay me this, I've struck gold. And they would invest, give their money, give their life savings away, only to find out that it was a worthless mine. And so a lot of us, when we find ourselves in counterfeit relationships, we can come out at the end of it and feel that way as well, that we've invested our entire life into these relationships only to find out that we have been swindled. So what does that look like when you are in a counterfeit relationship? So the first step is to know whether or not you are. So we need to identify it. So what does that look like? And like I said, sometimes the relationship may, we may appear bad, or, they may be, sometimes people challenge us in areas and we don't want to be challenged. And so it's like, oh, that they weren't good for me anyway. But they were actually the ones that were trying to challenge you. They were the ones like that were coming to sharpen you, but you didn't want to be sharpened. So not all relationships, like I said, that may appear bad are actually bad for you, and not all relationships that seem good are good for you. Because just like Peter wasn't the one. He was trying to hinder purpose, and sometimes people, well intended, may say, if I were you, I wouldn't do that. If I were you, I wouldn't do this. No, I wouldn't go here. I wouldn't do that. Why you want to go back to school? Why would you want to write that book? Why you want to do that? You're going to fail. What is this? But they seem well intended, but they're not. And then there are others who try to push you out of your place of comfort, and you don't want to go. And so we deem those as being bad for us, but that not necessarily that they were bad for us. We just call them bad because it made us uncomfortable, because they were trying to push us into a place maybe we weren't ready to go to. And so we pushed back because we weren't ready to move into the spaces where we need to go. And sometimes the pain of these counterfeit relationships may actually work out to be good for you. And we're going to talk about that as well. So what does these counterfeit relationships look like? And so where sometimes you may get love bombed, where they're showering you with gifts and and then they're all out, they're all in, they got all this time for you. They've got all this stuff and they are there, they're present. And then all of a sudden they just pull back and that bomb went off. And then they pull back, they're vanished. They have withdrawn, and you find yourself chasing after that relationship, trying to get back. You're like, what happened? What happened? And so now you become unstable because their affection, how they started out has changed, and you find yourself on shaky ground trying to figure out what happened. You see this a lot too, also in abusive relationships. Again, as the domestic violence survivor, I can say with confidence that that manipulation that was there, and that part of my being naive, My mother-in-law used to say I was young and dumb. Eh, yes, young and dumb, yes, but you knew that, but your son, you knew was a narcissist, and that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. We're not going to get into that right now. So they can keep you unstable. So this relationship has you being unstable because you don't know which way to go. You don't know how they're going to feel. Are they in a good mood today? Are they lovey dovey today? Or are they not? And so you're on pins and needles trying to figure out what's going on. And then they're back again with full of love and full of this, and then you start to second guess yourself, and sometimes you feel like you gaslight your own self into thinking that maybe it's me, and not the other person who is actually doing wrong. Um, so that's kind of one of the first things: lack of emotional connection. You don't feel seen or heard. You're sharing yourself. You've told them things. You told them when your birthday was. You told them all this stuff, and they don't remember. They can't remember the name of your friends. They don't remember even the name of your parents. They can't remember anything. There's no real connection. You could be with somebody for 5, 6 years, and you're like, how many times do I have to tell you this? So they never really. It's always about the surface stuff. Never wanted to really go deep into that. And again, not only relationships that are romantic, but friendships as well. You can be someone's quote friend, and you are more of a friend. You know all about them, but they know nothing about you because they didn't really hear you, and you're more there for them than they are for you. So that lack of emotional connection, there is not really that connectiveness where you feel that people see you and hear you especially when you're experiencing your own stuff, but you're there for them. And so that leads me into sometimes you feel used because you're meeting their needs. You're the one showing up. You're the one that's doing all this stuff. Sometimes maybe they need, I just need $5 to, put gas in my car, or can you loan me this, or can you give me this, and you know, can you? And so you're showing up for them, but they're not showing up for you. So there's that lack of balance in that relationship. You're the caretaker, the listening ear. You show up for everything, but they're never there for you. And so that again, where that leaves you unbalanced, you feel like I'm trying to be a good friend, and maybe they just don't know how. Again, we tend to gaslight ourselves when we are genuine in our relationships, and we feel like I'm in this because I'm a good friend, and we show up, but the other person is not necessarily there as a friend. And sometimes we're talking about I'm teaching this Bible course, and so one of the things we talked about is how scriptures can be misunderstood, but they're sayings and they're things that people can use against you. And one of those, a lot of times, especially uh, for us as believers, a lot of times people will use scriptures against you in friendships and relationships. And one of those things, is if you want to be a friend, and you got to show yourself friendly. But one of you're the one that's always showing yourself friendly, and you feel like I'm always giving out, but no, but you're the giver, but never the receiver, and it's never coming back to you. And sometimes we can feel as if we don't have value. So, and then sometimes our worth may be tied to these relationships, these friendships, and these friend groups that we are in, and that people have expectations of you to be the one to show up, but not for them to show up for you. And so that can lead us also to that place of a lack of safety and security. I can't trust you because I'm always out there, I'm giving, I'm pouring out, I'm doing this, but it's not reciprocated. So therefore I don't feel safe in this relationship. And that again brings us to that place where we are unstable and unbalanced in the relationship because there is no safety for us. We're not feeling that safe, and that person also again lacks commitment. There's no vision for the future. There's more like in romantic relationships. There's no vision for the future. They don't want to talk about it. Whenever you bring it up, they're like, "Oh, we have time," and you're like, I've heard of people who have been in relationships for 10, 15, 20 years, I remember I had a friend where this was her father. He had been in a relationship with a woman for 25 years, and they never got married. They lived together. I think they had a child. And when he got sick and she went to the hospital and they was like, "What's your relationship?" And they was like, "Well, you were the wife." And she was like, "No, we lived together. Well, we've been together for 25 years." And they were like, "You're not a spouse. We need to call his children to come." And you imagine investing 25 years of your life in this relationship and have nothing to show for it. And then when he passed away, she found out her name wasn't in the house. So the house wasn't hers. So it went to his children. Um, the bank account, he had a separate bank account from her. And it was so much stuff that she gave 25 years of her life to him. And, my friend was telling me that they've always talked about getting married, but never did for 25 years when she stayed. And then at the end of his life, to find out that she had nothing after 25 years. So we talk about that lack of security. What is she going to do? She invested all of this time. She was helping pay into this mortgage that her name was not on. She had basically, the money she thought, his life insurance, all those things were for his children and not for her, because the kids were from a prior relationship where he was married before. And I guess he decided that he didn't really want to get married. So he basically strung her along for 25 years. And, we were talking about that at work and what that experience must have been like for her. And she's not the only one. I've seen it happen in so many relationships where you're committed, or even in friendships where you think somebody is your friend and you find yourself in a difficult place, and, you may find out they didn't really like you. And you was like, "Well, I thought we were friends. We did this." And then when you start reflecting on that, and we're going to talk about how to heal, when you start reflecting, you realize that you were more the friend than they were ever a friend to you. But when you're in that space, when you're in that place, you can't really see what's going on until you step out. And then once you step out of the relationship and it's over, and you start to look back, and then you can see um, some of the things that you may have missed. So we need to acknowledge. So how do we heal from those? So we need to acknowledge and validate your feelings. So once it ends, you know, um, you need to be okay with the fact that you may feel betrayed, and there may be some confusion. Um, there was some hurt involved. Um, a lot of feelings, a lot of emotion. You're grieving that loss because it is a loss. Because especially when you invested time and emotions and sometimes money and all these things into this relationship, only to find out that it wasn't real. Where people have double families and all these different things, and you find out, you come to the end of it and realize it was a lie. How do you move on from all of that? So first, the first of being acknowledge, validate. I thought about this last week. Don't gaslight yourself into saying, and even talking yourself into believing it was all your fault. Yes, we probably had a role to play in it because we didn't necessarily see the red flags. And, sometimes people may say to you, XYZ, and you're like, no, no, no. And you didn't listen to outside voices who may have been able to see what you could not see because you were so in the thick of it that you weren't able to step out and see what was going on. And that's okay. And you can feel that way. You can feel feel all the feelings, feel all of them. And it's okay. You can be angry. You can, whatever that emotion is that you feel it, feel it and deal with it. You have to get that out of you. I was talking about bitterness the other day. We were looking at, I was talking about, relationship with my father, where he was abusive to us as children. And when I got older, I think I was stationed. If I was stationed in Korea, I was in South Carolina, but when I was young, and I was in charge of quarters. So basically, I had overnight duty, charge of quarters. Basically, you just make sure the buildings are secure, and you're 24 hours. And during that time, you have a lot of downtime. And I remember sitting there and just feeling that I needed to write him this letter. And I wrote him this letter, and I basically said that, the things that you did to me and allowed to happen to me, I can't allow that bitterness to stay inside of me and to be angry. And I needed to get that out. And so I wrote him, like a 20-page letter. It was just all pouring out. And, I mailed it, but it brought healing to me. And also, it kind of healed our relationship to the point where, I could tell my father that I loved him in spite of all the things that he did. And, it shaped who I was. And, it defined me in a lot of ways, the abuse that we suffered. But it also made me who I am today, that I've got a wealth of knowledge that out of that pain. So again, we're talking about how relationships, even those relationships that hurt, that sometimes they can push you into the place where you need to be. They push you into destiny. They push you into purpose. And sometimes you're like, God, couldn't you have done this a different way? And he could have, but people make choices and people make decisions that affect the lives of other people. And so how do we move beyond that place and recognize, the hurt and the pain that we feel? And then how can we use that as a stepping stone or as a bridge to push us into purpose? So one, acknowledge and validate your feelings, reflect on the experience. Were there any red flags? What did you see that maybe you have overlooked? Again, identify patterns. Are there any recurring patterns in your relationships? Whether it's friendships or romantic relationships, are there patterns that you find yourself and you start looking back and you're like, what, I always seem to pick this kind of a boyfriend or girlfriend, or my friends always seem to be this way. They're always so needy and they're always this. And I find myself just me always the one giving. And they're always never wanting to give back. And so so look at those patterns of relationships, again, yeah, I'm just writing it down. So start, sit down, take some time to reflect, to write down, what are maybe some of the red flags that you saw, that you ignored. I know I did, because I had called off our engagement and him taught me back into it. Oh, this, everything is good. And again, like his mother said, I was young and dumb. I didn't know, because that was really my first really like deep relationship. And so not really knowing. And then again, coming out of my place of trauma, I hadn't really been healed from that. So I went willingly into this relationship, not really knowing what abuse looks like, what manipulation looks like. And that may have been your story. You just didn't know. But maybe that was your first relationship, and then maybe the second, and then you're in the third or fourth, and you're still finding yourself. So look at those patterns. What is the things that you keep doing over and over again? Trying to make something different out of the same things that we do repeatedly. Consider the why. Why do you find yourself in these types of relationships? Try to understand why you attract the types of relationships, the friendships, the romantic relationships. Maybe sometimes even the jobs. You go to jobs, you leave one job that you hated, and you find yourself in the same kind of jobs, different place, same day. We keep going back into these cycles, and there are some things in us probably that drive us to go to these places. So taking a look at the why, and it's going to take some being honest conversations with yourself, because you need to recognize that in order for you to grow, you need to know the why. Why do I find myself in this space over and over again? Why do I keep coming around this mountain? Why am I still here? What lessons do I need to learn so that I can move forward with getting better? What unmet needs do I have that these people, I think they're going to solve and fix these unmet needs within me sometimes? And also, what insecurities do I have? What do I feel like I'm lacking that on the outside, these romantic relationships, these friendships seem to feel, and they may feel them for a season, and they may look good, but then when you start looking at them, they all start to look the same. And then you recognize that you're falling into the same trap, that same pit again. But we want you to be healed. So this is what about this empowered living is all about. Is for us to live this life and also to live godly, but God called us to an abundant life. And again, it's where faith and purpose align. So you can't fully walk in your purpose if you're always in these types of relationships that are draining and that keep you from fulfilling the purpose and the call that you have on your life. And so the next thing, so once you consider the why, you looked at all the things, you looked at the patterns, you looked at all of those things, and even during that period, it's time to focus on self-care. You gotta take care of yourself. You know, you're healing, you're grieving, all of these things you're trying to figure out the why. Even in that time, take care of yourself. So focus on self-care, prioritize your well-being, prioritize your mental health. We're still in May. This is still Mental Health Awareness Month. So, look at those things that prioritize your well-being, your physical, emotional, your spiritual well-being. One of the things that I do a lot of times when I'm entering into friendships, relationships, whatever, I always ask God, and I always pray this prayer, and it has not failed me. And I was like, God, if this person, this job, this whatever is not meant for my good, show it to me and then give me the courage to walk away. And that's something that, the part of having the courage to walk away, because sometimes we feel that, I'm going to be by myself. I won't have any friends. I won't have this. This is going to happen. Da, 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 da. All these different things that we tell ourselves that's going to happen. But then we find ourselves so drained, so defeated, so broken down, so broken up. Where if we had the courage to walk away in the beginning, we wouldn't be here where we are. But now that we are here, let's talk about what we can do to move forward and to be healed from all of that. Seek support, whether it's professional, whether it's personal. Seek counseling. I tell you all the time, I'm not opposed to having a counselor. Whether it's pastoral care, whether it's a professional counselor, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, do that. Set boundaries. Learn how to set boundaries. Boundaries are important. We need those boundaries, so set them. Practice self-compassion. Don't beat yourself up because of what happened. Don't stay in the dumps, laying down, and why did I miss that? How could I have been so stupid? Da, da, da. You get 30 seconds of a pity party, then move on. Love yourself. Take care of yourself, and be compassionate to yourself. Yes, you were in a place you didn't understand. Now it's time to move on. Take care of yourself. Be gracious. Do like you would a friend, who found themselves in that place. And you're like, no, God, I see you. I understand what happened to you. I understand you made a poor choice and you were in this because of these reasons. So, let's, I'm gonna say most of us, let's eat ice cream. I'm not really a big ice cream fan. So yeah, that wouldn't be me. So if you're having those pity parties and you eat ice cream, don't call me, because I don't really like ice cream. So, but if that's your jam, do what you got to do. But, don't stay there. Don't stay in that pit too long. Dust yourself off. Love yourself. Go get your nails done. Go get a massage. Get a facial. Take yourself out to dinner. Celebrate the fact that you survived and that you're moving on, and be kind to yourself. So focus on your goals. I talked about that before, that sometimes because of that relationship, you may have given up some of your goals, some of your dreams, while you were trying to focus on this relationship, these friendships where, you wanted to maybe go back to school and they're like, oh, don't do that. You wanted to no, don't do that. I wouldn't do that if I were you. And now you find yourself, now is your time. Now is your moment, as part of your healing journey, to do the things that bring you joy, do the things that you know that you were called to do. Again, this is where Empowered to Live, where we're focusing on faith and purpose aligning, coming together. And so they work hand in hand, and we need that part of our journey to recognize what we need to do, and then how we need to grow together. So if you find yourself in that place, If this is you, if it resonated with you and you're like, okay, I know what I need to do, be bold, have courage, take that step and do it. Begin that journey of healing, of wholeness, of recognizing that you are valuable. Scripture says that we're more than rubies, and our rubies were something that was very valuable at that point in time, and still valuable today. And you need to know your worth, know your value. Um, you know, this broken friendship, broken relationship, is not your fault. You did what you were supposed to do. You were a friend, and now that you find yourself on the outside of this, like I said, don't gaslight yourself into thinking, how am I messed up? How can I heal this relationship? There's some relationships that are broken and that's not going to be repaired because that person needs to be healed and you're not the healer. You are not the deliverer, and you need to recognize that as well. You can't put yourself in the place of God to make this person be and to bring them to that place of healing and wholeness where they will actually care about you as a person. And you need to recognize that and be okay with that as part of your grieving process as you're moving on, to recognize that you need to let them go. So again, if this resonates with you, share it with a friend. I don't say that in this program, like, share, subscribe. I don't know. If it does, if it touches you and you want to share it with someone, that's fine. God will do what he needs to do, and it will touch those who needs to hear the message of hope. And that's one of the things we want to do here. And part of the Empowered to Live podcast is about inspiration, information, and education, instruction. So we want to instruct you, we want to inspire you, and we want to inform you so that you can live the empowered life. So thank you again for joining me for another evening of Empowered to Live. I will catch you next week, and we're going to talk about prayer. You have a great night. Bye-bye.